from the participating states' foreign ministers is now out, and it calls on North Korea to follow through on the promises it made to the U.S. back in June at their summit. Park Hee-jun has this report.
The foreign ministers at the ASEAN Regional Forum have jointly called for North Korea's complete denuclearization. The chairman's statement released early Monday demands that the North fulfills its commitment to complete denuclearization as promised and suspends all nuclear and missile tests. The statement also welcomes the outcomes of the two inter-Korean summits and the North Korea-U.S. summit held this year. It urges all relevant parties to cooperate in fully implementing the April 27 Panmunjom Declaration and the June 12 Sentosa Agreement to realize lasting peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. South Korea's foreign minister Kang Kyung-hwa said the meetings were a good chance to reaffirm the shared goal of complete denuclearization and lasting peace in the region. She told reporters on Sunday that although Pyongyang's foreign minister Lee Yong-ho rejected bilateral meetings with Seoul, Kang said the two held sincere discussions during their brief encounter at the gala dinner.
We exchanged brief but honest views about developments on the peninsula and the ways to cooperate, and I think it's helped lay the groundwork for the Panmunjom Declaration to be carried out.
According to the Washington Post, Lee Yong-ho also had a friendly conversation with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on the sidelines of the meetings, in which they promised to talk again soon. Also, with a letter written by U.S. President Donald Trump for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un having been delivered, there are prospects for productive discussions in the future. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The nuclear envoys of South Korea and China were due to hold talks in Beijing today about North Korea's denuclearization and peace on the peninsula. Seoul's foreign ministry said Sunday that Lee Do-hun, the representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, would be meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Kong Chuen-yo, as part of their efforts to strengthen the two countries' strategic communication. Observers say the two sides may also touch on the issue of declaring a formal end to the Korean War. U.S. President Donald Trump is sounding confident that his tariffs on American trade partners are working, as his administration considers duties on goods worth hundreds of billions of dollars more. Trump says the tariffs have been extremely effective in creating jobs and wealth in the U.S. Kim Yo-sun reports.
In a series of tweets over the weekend, U.S. President Donald Trump celebrated his administration's tariffs on imports from trade partners, including China. He said on Sunday that the tariffs are working big time, adding that countries need to make products within the U.S. to avoid further taxation. The remark can be interpreted as his willingness to continue pressuring Beijing, which has fired back at Washington by imposing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports worth some $60 billion. A day earlier, President Trump also tweeted that tariffs have had a tremendously positive effect on America's steel industry, adding it has led to more jobs and wealth. As the trade war between the world's two largest economies rages on, the Wall Street Journal reports that such tensions have put South Korea's Samsung Electronics in a, quote, uncomfortable spot. It explains that Samsung is trying to navigate through the trade war between the two countries, as they are among the company's biggest markets, accounting for nearly 40% of its revenue last year. And at the same time, the report says Samsung has also been facing tariffs within the American market, including a whopping 50% duty on its washing machines. Despite such challenges, the article quoted industry analysts who say Samsung does have some protection, explaining how many companies are heavily dependent on Samsung's components for their own products. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
This week is starting out slightly cooler than last week when Korea saw record-high temperatures in around 60% of the country. We're still in the mid-30s, but we're getting a small amount of some much-needed rain today. As our Hong Yu reports, the government is acting to make sure that people have some refuge from the heat, especially more vulnerable groups.
More than half of South Korea's weather stations recorded the hottest weather in the country's modern history. According to the Korea Meteorological Administration, 28 weather stations marked new record highs last Wednesday, on the first day of August. Hongcheon in Gangwon-do Province reached 41 degrees Celsius, the highest temperature South Korea has seen since records began in 1904. Seoul, too, reached an all-time high of 39.6 degrees. The heat's been continuing after dark and into the mornings, causing what meteorologists call tropical nights. For more than 2 weeks now, it hasn't gotten below 25 degrees. In fact, in Seoul, on August 2nd and 3rd, it didn't even get below 30, what they call a super tropical night. The heat has caused 35 deaths and made thousands more ill with heat stroke and other symptoms. It's also caused power failures in some regions because the grid couldn't handle the sudden increase in demand for electricity to power fans and air conditioning. 2 apartments in the city of Goyang, just to the west of the capital, lost power last Thursday, leaving residents to suffer in the heat. The South Korean Minister of the Interior and Safety commented on Facebook that the heat wave will soon be designated as a natural disaster, will free up funds for relief measures. The minister also said now is the right moment to spend time and money to make sure people can escape the heat. The government's plan is to make sure people have ways to stay cool, which will include lowering electricity bills. The killer heat is expected to diminish a little after this weekend, but the daytime highs will continue to reach the mid-30s for a while. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
A powerful earthquake on Sunday of magnitude 6.9 hit the Indonesian tourist island of Lombok, leaving more than 80 people dead and hundreds more injured. The area is still reeling from another quake that claimed more than a dozen lives just last week. Noaram has the latest.
The earthquake struck the Indonesian tourist island of Lombok on Sunday, killing at least 82 people. The National Disaster Mitigation Agency confirmed the death toll, more than doubling its earlier figure of 32. The tremor could also be felt in neighbouring Bali. It struck just off the north coast of Lombok at about 30 kilometres below ground. The US Geological Survey slightly downgraded Sunday's quake after initially measuring it at magnitude 7. The tremor came a week after more than a dozen people were killed in a strong tremor that hit the same area. The latest quake damaged buildings and triggered power cuts, forcing residents to flee.
I was watching TV when I felt a big shake. The lamp is shaking and people shouting, "Get out, get out." I run out of the house in the dark because electricity is down.
A tsunami warning was also issued but was lifted several hours later. Airports in Lombok and Bali continued operating Sunday night, but there was a brief evacuation at the Lombok airport due to a power cut. Hundreds of people are said to have been injured, and those being treated in hospital were moved outdoors as a precaution amid warnings of aftershocks. Noaram, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
The curtains came down on this year's ASEAN Regional Forum on Sunday. What's particularly interesting about this forum is that it's the only one that both North and South Korea, as well as the US and China, all participate in. There had been much anticipation ahead of this year's event because despite the positive developments that had been made in North Korea relations this year, progress had stalled recently, and it was hoped that if the ministers met, then negotiations would get back on track, particularly between North Korea and the US. Although they did meet, they did not sit down for formal talks, and differences between the sides remain. Oh Jang-hee tells us more.
Expectations were high at the ASEAN Regional Forum, with the foreign ministers of South Korea, North Korea, the US and China all present. It was hoped the forum could provide momentum in the struggling North Korea-US denuclearization talks. But the annual regional forum ended with no foreign ministerial meetings at all between the two Koreas, nor between North Korea and the US. The tug-of-war continued between Pyongyang and Washington, with clashing views on sanctions. Making a statement at the forum, North Korean Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho stressed that Pyongyang has already taken some goodwill steps, halting nuclear missile tests and dismantling its main nuclear test site. Pointing out that Washington is not responding to such actions and is still holding on to sanctions, he said, both sides will have to work things out simultaneously. Meanwhile, speaking to the reporters separately, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo emphasized the need to strictly enforce all sanctions against North Korea, mentioning recent reports about illegal ship-to-ship petroleum transfers. Over the weekend, the U.S. also slapped new sanctions on North Korean and Russian entities, saying sanctions will remain in place until North Korea's final denuclearization. Reports have been pouring out from Pyongyang for several days in a row, all urging Washington to take actions in return for the North's efforts, namely lifting sanctions. Pyongyang's state-run newspaper Rodong-Sinmun claimed on Monday that the UN resolutions should have disappeared already as Pyongyang has taken some practical steps. Saying that the most important thing now is to build confidence with one another, it urged the U.S. to abandon sanctions and pressure. While Washington is firm in keeping its economic pressure on Pyongyang, especially with its joint military drills with South Korea suspended, how North Korea and the U.S. find a middle ground remains to be seen. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Now, taking a look back at the forum with us, we have Professor Min Jung-hoon from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Thank you for making the journey to come in today.
My pleasure.
Now, last year, it was seemed to be high atmosphere at the ASEAN Regional Forum, with North Korea setting off nuclear missiles and nuclear bombs every other week, it seemed. But this year, it seemed more relatively calm. And that was perhaps reflected in the chairman's statement. The chairman's joint statement at the end called on the regime to commit the complete denuclearization of North Korea as promised, but it stopped short of calling for CVID. Now, why do you think they deliberately stopped short of calling for that CVID?
Well, as you mentioned, unlike the last year when member nations expressed their grave concerns about North Korea's provocations, they had a good atmosphere with North Korea this year. It reflects the improved security situations on the Korean Peninsula based on the successful inter-Korean summits and the North Korea-US summit. And according to the chair's statement, the foreign ministers attended the ARF this year, urged North Korea to fulfill its commitment to complete denuclearization and its pledge to refrain from further the nuclear and missile tests. As you mentioned, some people expected that the chair's statement could include the phrase CVID, complete, verifiable, and irreversible dismantlement, but it didn't. Instead, it included, as you mentioned, the complete denuclearization, as in the Panmunjom Declaration. But I want to say that the two terms, CVID and complete denuclearization, should be interchangeable because basically both terms require North Korea to dismantle all nuclear capabilities it has. So it does not mean that complete denuclearization is lowering pressure on North Korea compared to the CVID. So I think that we are moving forward in the right direction with appropriate terms that the all participants could be satisfied with.
Moving forward, but perhaps not as fast as some had anticipated, there was much talk about a possible North Korea and South Korea sitting down together, North Korea and the US sitting down together, and all three doing a trilateral meetup as well. But that didn't really happen. Why do you think the North Korea decided not to go ahead with these talks?
Well, it was known that the Lee Yong-ho, the foreign minister of North Korea, turned down South Korea's request to have a bilateral meeting between the two Koreas by saying that it was not right time for the talks. And as you know, North Korea did not have a bilateral meeting with the United States either. So it is like North Korea was expressing its complaints about the situation that the United States is not offering the declaration to end the Korean War, and is also pushing South Korea to take a more active role to change the U.S. attitudes about that. But the U.S. and the North Korea stick to the very different opinions about the denuclearization process and the declaration to end the Korean War. So it is like which comes first, or which party moves first situation. But if we think about the domestic situations that U.S. and North Korea have, U.S. got the tougher situations than the North Korea. As you know, even after the successful North Korea and U.S. summit, there still exists the pessimistic view in the United States that North Korea is not sincere in terms of denuclearizing itself. So if Trump administration agrees with the declaration to end the Korean War at this stage, then it is expected that it would face a serious criticism in the United States that it gave another credit to North Korea without getting anything about the denuclearization. So if North Korea has a will to denuclearize itself, it's necessary for North Korea to step forward by providing U.S. with the kind of the declaration list showing all of its nuclear capabilities and the facilities. Then U.S. could have a political room and ground to persuade its domestic audience, and would be able to move toward providing North Korea with their declaration to end the Korean War. So North Korea, I think, should move first.
So in your opinion, Professor, do you think is there any concerns about the fact that they didn't meet, that these top men, these top diplomats, they were all in the same room, but it's such an opportunity for them to meet? Is it worrying, the fact that there was no progress made on that front, do you think?
No, I don't think so, because although they didn't have a formal meeting between the two countries, they exchanged their opinions in terms of their formal guest speaking and other things. And recently, the top leaders of the two countries, the President Trump and the Chairman Kim, exchanged another letters, and they showed how they would make a progress in terms of the denuclearization process and the establishing a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula in the letters. So they are just showing the strategies in terms of the negotiation process. So, and as I mentioned, the Lee Young-oh clearly mentioned that it was the right time for the talks. Instead, it expressed its complaints to the United States and South Korea. So it's but they are still they don't want to walk away from the negotiations.
Alongside the North Korea denuclearization, there's also the issue about declaring the end of the Korean War. And there was hope that progress would be made on this front as well. Now, North Korea didn't sit down with the US or South Korea, but South Korea did sit down with China and the US. And they're expected that they talked about this issue about declaring the end of the war. Do you think they made progress there?
Yeah, I think so, but it's not clear how much progress they made. But in the ASEAN Regional Forum, the Kang Kyung-hwa, the Foreign Minister of South Korea, had a bilateral meeting with the United States and China respectively, and they exchanged their opinions about the declaration to end the war and the peace through the regime building process. And although a formal meeting was not taken place between the two Koreas, the Kang Kyung-hwa and the Lee Young-oh, there's encountered, or that they got the meeting, or just an informal meeting at the dinner, and it was known that they exchanged the candid opinions on various situations, and they got a chance to understand the other side. So regarding the declaration of ending the Korean War, and still we have some way to go before we reach an agreement. But we are still in the process, and as you know, the North Korea and the U.S. got totally different opinions about how they see the declaration to end the Korean War. And for the United States, U.S. argues that the declaration could be possible only after North Korea takes the visible measures directly related to the denuclearization. In contrast, North Korea argues that North Korea has already taken the several measures for the denuclearizing itself, so it's time that U.S. move forward to provide the declaration. So the other big gap between the two countries, and in the middle, South Korea working hard to facilitate and narrow down the gap. So but again, so the U.S. and North Korea, they don't want to go away from the negotiations. they are just still in the beginning of the negotiations. So we need to give a little more time for them. Yeah.
You say you give more time, but South Korea's foreign minister raised expectations in her press conference afterwards, saying that she hoped that it would still be possible to reach a declaration to end the war by the end of the year. And then she also mentioned that the UN General Assembly in September would be an important opportunity. What do you think she means by this?
Well, what I meant by allowing them to have more time was that, think about what happened in the past. So we got the first historic meeting between the United States and North Korea probably 2 months ago from now. But before the summit, all things passed so fast, and for the past several months, so many things happened. So we may expect that the further measures would follow the same speed, but so we are going into the details. So unlike having the kind of political, symbolic declaration between the top leaders, we are going into the details. So details, usually come with the very different opinions and the tough opinion changes and other things. So we have to a little bit take more time before they move forward and forward. But you mentioned about the possibility of having the second summit meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim in September, probably at the United Nations General Assembly meeting in New York. But for President Trump to invite Chairman Kim, there would be the visible measures or the performances or the outcomes that President Trump could rely on. So that's what the U.S. is urging North Korea to move forward, like the sub-meeting, the declaration list that showing all of its the nuclear capabilities and the facilities. Without such visible measures, it would be very hard for President Trump to invite Chairman Kim. So, you mentioned that the Gang showed the possibility of inviting the Chairman Kim in September in New York. It means that possibly, just my opinion, in terms of the South Korea's facilitating role, U.S. and North Korea possibly are narrowing down the opinion, the gaps about the declaration to end the war. If they could narrow down the opinion gaps and they could reach an agreement before the end of this month, then we could see the better opportunities that we can see the Chairman Kim in New York next month.
So Kim, Trump, second summit could be on the cards, but unlikely for now unless North Korea makes new steps. Right before we go, quickly, so I also want to talk about the UN report that came out over the weekend that said North Korea is continuing its nuclear and missile program and even selling weapons to places like Syria and Libya and other places. And are you surprised at all by this kind of report that North Korea is still, producing nuclear weapons? And what consequences do you think there will be to this report?
Yes, and it's another good news for whatever reason to hear that the North Korea still doing some North Korea is violating the UN sanctions like that. But but again the North Korea and the United States they don't want to walk away from the negotiations. So this report could push the North Korea to move back to the right track in terms of the abiding by the UN sanctions, and it also push hard the China and Russia not to provide North Korea with kind of the oil and other things that could violate the UN sanctions. So U.S. wanted the speed up the denuclearization process now. So the U.S. knows that the lifting sanctions is one of the important things and one of the things that North Korea really want to get. So the U.S. In terms of that leverage, the pushing North Korea and China and Russia for the denuclearization process. But again, I want to emphasized that although United States is putting more sanctions on North Korea and other countries involved, but still United States still got a hope that they are moving in the right direction in terms of the denuclearizing the North Korea and establishing peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. So I don't think that such report could make serious. There's a negative impact on the negotiation process.
We're out of time, but Professor, thank you for coming in today and sharing us with your insights.
Thank you for having me.
That's where we will end today's show. I'll be back same time tomorrow, but do stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscast for all the latest from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Goodbye.